Bam. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this episode of The Branca Show. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca, and obviously we do these shows live with all the little glitches that come from having a small town lawyer produce his own show. Well, the good news. What a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. A former FBI director has just been indicted by a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of North Carolina. James Comey, indicted on 2 felony counts threatening the President of the United States and transmitting a threat in interstate commerce. All of this, of course, stemming from his now infamous, just discovery of some seashells being displayed in the sand that spell out 8647. 47, of course, referring to President Trump, the 47th president of the United States. And 86, we all know what 86 means. Demise. Prosecutors charge that any reasonable person familiar with the circumstances would recognize the image as a serious expression of intent to do harm to President Trump or encourage others to do so. Comey, a sworn law enforcement officer for decades, I mean, really a prosecutor, and then an FBI director, would have us believe he stumbled upon this cool shell formation by sheer coincidence. And yesterday he turned himself in for arrest. Oh, what a pile of garbage this guy is. It couldn't happen to a nicer dude. Predictably, Comey's apologists in the media and legal circles and pseudo-legal circles are already shrieking that his post with the seashells is ambiguous and shielded by the First Amendment. What they conveniently ignore, of course, is that whether speech qualifies as a true threat is a question to argue post-indictment at trial, not a basis for throwing out a properly returned grand jury indictment. Lots of people seem to think that a federal judge, an unelected, black-robed, tyrannical, inferior federal district trial court judge, is going to toss out this indictment. That's not how it works, especially not in the Fourth Circuit, where this case has been brought. The grand jury found probable cause for this trial. There's really no practical means for this federal judge, whoever is assigned to the case, to throw out the indictment. That's within the province of the grand jury, not within the province of the judge. So the prospects that James Comey is not going to end up going to trial are pretty infinitesimal. So let's jump into it. Here, of course, is his, let's see, let me make sure we're working everywhere. His image that made him famous. Comey, oh, look, cool shell formation on my beach walk. Oh, what a cool shell formation. Kill the president? That's the cool shell formation? That's a remarkable take. Former FBI Director Comey, who tried to railroad Trump and his administration. And here's Attorney General, acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, announcing this. By the way, before I get into his announcement, does it seem like there's a lot more going on with the Department of Justice recently? It does seem like that to me. Like post-Pam Bondi. I mean, suddenly we're having these massive raids of Somali fraudsters. A friend of Dr. Fauci was indicted, one of his colleagues, closest colleagues, a number 2 guy. Now this James Comey indictment. Act Blue, the Democrat fundraising organization, corrupt, of course, is under investigation. Southern Poverty Law Center's been indicted. John Brennan's under investigation. Fannie Willis is under investigation. This seems like it happened all in the last couple of weeks. Now, in fairness to Pam Bondi, these kinds of things, of course, take a long time to put into motion. They've been investigating this travesty since it happened. Is there a date on his post here? No, but it was like last May or something like that. So it's been a year, right? May 1st is tomorrow. So they were investigating it 9, 10, 11 months before they brought this indictment. Let's hear Todd Blanche talk about this. Whoop, that's just an image. I was looking for the video. I don't want to read it if we can watch him. Hold on a second. Let me find it. Let me find it. Because there were some good clips here I wanted to share. Yeah, here's a few good clips. All right, let me pull this up instead. And tell me if the audio's messed up. It should be okay.
Director Comey posted this almost a year ago. Why bring this case now? Did you always feel like this was a strong prosecution, or did something change recently?
This investigation just didn't come now. It's the result of a lot of work by law enforcement over the past year. We don't time when we bring cases around anything other than when the investigation is at a place where we should go to the grand jury, and that's exactly what we did in this case as well. Okay,
so they've been investigating for a long time. We've got another clip here.
I think it's fair to say.
Here we go.
I think it's fair to say that threatening the life of anybody is dangerous and potentially a crime. Threatening the life of the President of the United States will never be tolerated by the Department of Justice.
Remember, folks, the First Amendment doesn't protect all speech. That would be ridiculous. That would be ridiculous. Here's another clip here.
Threats against all sorts of individuals. Over the past year, this department has charged dozens of cases involving threats against all sorts of individuals. We take these seriously, every single one of them. For example, just today in the Northern District of Florida, there was a guilty plea from an individual who threatened multiple political leaders, including President Trump. In the Eastern District of North Carolina, where this case was indicted earlier today, there are multiple threats cases very similar to this one, including one where the defendant pled guilty recently to threatening former President Biden, another one that's scheduled to go to trial this summer, another one indicted, an individual was indicted for threatening Tom Homan. I say that to say that while this case is unique and this indictment stands out because of the name of the defendant, his alleged conduct is the same kind of conduct that we will never tolerate and that we will always investigate and regularly prosecute.
But of course, Comey's in the club, right? He's not supposed to be subject to the normal rules. He's one of the elites. He's one of the elites. Another thing the left, the Comey defenders like to talk about is proving intent. Proving intent. How do you prove someone's intent? We don't have mind reading machines.
Sir, how will you prove intent when, as the director had acknowledged, Mr. Comey said he did not associate 86 with doing harm, and he took it down promptly, said it was political speech, not an intent to harm the president?
Well, it's not, this case was indicted today. This conduct occurred about a year ago, May 15th of last year. There's been a tremendous amount of investigation. And how do you prove intent in any case? You prove intent with witnesses, with documents, with the defendant himself to the extent it's appropriate. And that's how we'll improve intent in this case. And so I think that talking about what Mr. Comey will or will not do if there's a trial, when there's a trial, it's very premature for me to do that today.
You know, these people pretend that you can't prove intent, like it's such a difficult thing to do, like you would need a mind reading machine to know what someone's intent is. How can you possibly know what someone's intent is? They only say that when it's one of their guys. Do they say that when it's Trump, when they're prosecuting Trump for business filings? Do they say, well, how are you going to prove he had the intent to commit a crime? It's crazy. It's not crazy. Every criminal conviction requires a proof of mens rea, a criminal intent. It happens thousands of times a day, every day across the United States in criminal prosecutions. No one is required to prove anybody guilty of a crime beyond all doubt. The prosecutor is only required to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Juries every day by the thousands make determinations of intent without reading people's minds by inference. They make reasonable inferences from the data available to them. You make inferences from things people say, from things people do, from other communications, from emails, from texts. There's 1,000 ways that we infer someone's intent. We do that just in day-to-day life, don't we? And it happens beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal prosecutions all the time.
The Justice Department, in this filing today, also issued an arrest warrant for Mr. Comey. Is it your belief that he is a continued public threat? And is there a request also for detention that you anticipate will be made in this case?
So the Department of Justice does not issue arrest warrants, grand juries do. And so the grand jury returned an indictment and arrest warrant. I expect that there will be communication with Mr. Comey's counsel, and we'll go from there. This case will proceed like hundreds of others do every year. There will be some sort of arraignment set by the judge or assigned to the magistrate judge, and when that happens, you'll know about it.
One of the interesting parts of all this is there's this is all well-established procedure. We're not inventing all this criminal justice procedure just for James Comey, former FBI director. And it's just being followed in the same old way. But you hear people talk about this, and they're acting like they don't. Suddenly they're acting stupid, like liberals do. They're just pretending. They're just pretending that they don't understand what's going on. This is all so mysterious and complicated and ambiguous. It's just not. It's just not. Here we have
tools and personnel.
Kash Patel had a few things to say at the same press conference. We pull him up.
As you heard from the Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney, former FBI Director James Comey has now been indicted for 2 felony counts. While many of you may read this indictment and view this matter as a simple investigation, it is the farthest thing from that. Every single investigation this FBI and our partners at the Department of Justice undertake, especially those that involve the threats to harm or hurt or even kill individuals, whether they hold public office or civilians in our country.
Of course, interesting timing that it happened the week after another assassination attempt on Trump.
Are met with the same measure of investigative prowess and tools and personnel in partnership with the Department of Justice as anyone else. As the U.S. Attorney indicated, James Comey will be afforded every matter of due process under the United States Constitution. And as the Attorney General indicated, this has been a case that's been investigated over the past 9, 10, 11 months. These cases take time. Our investigators work methodically. They are career agents, career prosecutors who work these matters. They call the balls and strikes in the field as they see fit pursuant to the facts of the case and the law. They took that information and made a presentment to a grand jury, a jury of peers in the district in which the alleged crime took place. And that grand
A +2 Republican district, by the way.
grand jury spoke, and that grand jury returned a 2-count indictment against James Comey.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this indictment. I have it here. It's not very long. And see what it actually has to say. You know, here we like to look at the actual law. That's a little too big. Let's see. How's that look? All right. April 28th. 2 days ago and yesterday, Comey was indicted. I did plan to cover this yesterday, of course, but then we got the fantastic Louisiana versus Calais Voting Rights Act decision out of the Supreme Court. That's going to be, by the way, we're all here right now, of course. We're all here right now. Looking at this, the James Comey indictment, but the members only show today is going to be more on yesterday's Louisiana versus Calais Voting Rights Act decision out of the Supreme Court, because the Democrats are melting down. This is a headshot. 86 Democrats, as a result of this decision, they're having a thoroughly enjoyable meltdown. And the Republicans are by and large being, at least talking, uncharacteristically aggressive about taking advantage of this opportunity that was just put on their plate. So it's just a fantastic time to be alive. And I'm also going to cover, I missed it yesterday, but there was like a one-page concurrence by Clarence Thomas. And man, I tell you, when you get a majority opinion this good, written by Justice Samuel Alito, where he concisely in 35 pages restructures decades of Voting Rights Act law in a very coherent and rational and constitutionally sound way. You get that from Alito, and then you get the icing on top of a one-page concurrence from Clarence Thomas as a buffer before you get to the 60, 70 pages of the scrones screeching in a dissent. That is a good day, and that is a good decision. So the members only show, of course, you need to be a member, but it's only 16 cents a day, $5 a month to be a member, folks, either on YouTube or Locals. The link for the members only show and the link to become a member are all in the description. So be sure to join us for that. Become a member of the family. You won't regret it. I promise. I promise. You can trust me. I'm not like the others. James Bryan with an E, indictment. The grand jury charges. So keep in mind, what happened here is a bunch of evidence was presented to the grand jury. And then they decide whether or not to sign off on an indictment. And this is what they signed off on. On or about May 15th, 2025, in the Eastern District of North Carolina, the defendant, James Bryan Comey, did knowingly and willfully make a threat to take the life of and to inflict bodily harm upon the President of the United States, and that he publicly posted a photograph on the internet social media site Instagram, which depicted seashells arranged in a pattern making out 8647, which a reasonable recipient who is familiar with the circumstances would interpret as a serious expression of an intent to do harm to the President of the United States. In violation of 18 U.S.C. 871A, that's count one. Count two. On or about May 15th, 2025, the Eastern District of North Carolina, the defendant, James Bryan Comey, Bryan with an E, knowingly and willfully to transmit in interstate and foreign commerce a communication that contained a threat to kill the president, Donald J. Trump, specifically by publicly posting a photograph on the internet social media site Instagram, which depicted seashells arranged in a pattern making out 8647, which a reasonable recipient who is familiar with the circumstances would interpret as a serious expression of an intent to do harm to the president in violation of 18 U.S.C. 875C. So one is the making of the threat, the other is putting the threat through interstate commerce. Here's a really interesting part of this. This is not more crimes being charged, this forfeiture notice. But notice is hereby given that all right, title, and interest in the property described herein is subject to forfeiture upon conviction of any offense charged herein constituting specific unlawful activity or a conspiracy to commit such activity. The defendant shall forfeit to the United States any property, real or personal, which constitutes or is derived from proceeds traceable to said offense. You know what they're talking about here? James Comey was publishing a novel, a fictional novel, at the time he posted that image on Instagram. He was on a book tour. They're going after the money from the book tour, the money from the book, whatever money he made. That's what the forfeiture is all about. If any of the above described forfeitable property, they don't say it's the book, but of course, it's the book. as a result of any act or omission of defendant cannot be located upon the exercise of due diligence, has been transferred or sold to or deposited with a third party, so if he's hiding the money with his kids, has been placed beyond the jurisdiction of the court, has been substantially diminished in value, or has been commingled with other property which cannot be divided without difficulty, it is the intent of the United States to seek forfeiture of any other property of said defendant up to the value of the forfeitable property. True bill, April 28th, 2026. So that's the indictment. It's real as real can be. So who thinks, should I do a poll? Let's see. Do you think Comey, because Comey's been indicted before on other matters, and that indictment got dismissed because a federal judge decided that the U.S. attorney managing that case was not appropriately appointed. But now he's been indicted again. You think this one will get dismissed? Do you think Comey will go to trial? Or that this indictment will be dismissed pre-trial? So, go to trial. 1 in chat. And dismissed. 2 in chat. So remember how these polls work, folks. You don't click on the poll. You have to put a 1 or a 2 in the chat to represent 1, go to trial, 2, dismissed. Let me put that up on the screen. There we go. That's a good place for it, I think. All right, so let me know what you think. Let me know. Oh, dismissed. Dismissed took a big lead at the start. A big lead at the start. Hey, we got a new member. Welcome to the family, Alexander. You'll be able to join us for not just this show, which is where we are right now. You'll be able to join us for the members only show, where we're going to laugh, love, pray over the great decision yesterday out of the Supreme Court on the Voting Rights Act that makes it unconstitutional to have racist congressional districts. Let's hear a little bit more here from Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. He was on some news shows as well. Whoops. Pull this up here.
If anybody in this country thinks, especially what happened over the past couple years with respect to President Trump, that it is okay for anybody to threaten the President of the United States, that it is okay to threaten the President of the United States and then have the media or others say, well, that's not serious, then we have a bigger problem than I even imagined in this country. Of course it's serious when you threaten the President of the United States, and anybody that tries to put forward some narrative that this is just about seashells or something to the contrary is missing the point. You cannot threaten the President of the United States. That's not my decision. That's Congress's decision in a law that they passed. And so, yes, of course this is a serious case. If anybody in this country...
Of course it's a serious case. And of course, this has been looked at for quite some time. Here's May 15th, 2025, the day that Comey posted that Seashell picture. Then Secretary Kristi Noem writes, disgraced former FBI director, who was, after all, fired by Trump, James Comey, just called for the assassination of Trump. DHS and Secret Service is investigating this threat and will respond appropriately. By the way, it's shocking that the person who posted this Seashell thing, the poor judgment this displays in doing this, even if it's meant not seriously, even if it's meant as a political statement, the poor judgment being shown by James Comey, a man who for years was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What a dumbass. He was a federal prosecutor his whole career. He had a serious job with serious responsibilities and making serious decisions that had serious negative impacts for many people. And now he exposes himself for what he really is, this idiotic doofus, to put himself in this position. All right, here's a longer clip from Tulsi Gabbard. I don't show enough of Tulsi. So I'm going to play this whole thing. She was part of all this investigation. Let's hear what she has to say here.
Tulsi Gabbard's the director of national intelligence. Are you buying that the former FBI director didn't know what 86 Trump meant?
Absolutely not, Jesse. That is a ridiculous and insane statement to make, certainly within this context, but especially coming from a guy who's the former director of the FBI, a guy who spent most of his career prosecuting mobsters and gangsters, people who know and execute other humans, and use this exact lingo of 86. Comey himself admitted in his follow-on message that he knew that this was a political statement. Well, the only reason he knew that, Jesse, was because a little over a month ago, a bunch of anti-Trump, anti-Elon Musk protesters were proliferating the use of this 8647 slogan, which was a veiled call to action to murder the sitting president of the United States. So for Comey to think that we, the American people, are so stupid as to think that he, as a former FBI director, former prosecutor, and someone who clearly pays attention to what's going on, would believe his lie that he didn't know what this actually was calling for. The dangerousness of this, Jesse, lie that he didn't know be underestimated. When we have 2 assassination attempts on the president's life, when we have people who look to guys like Comey, who've been celebrated by MSNBC, 2 assassination attempts on the president's life, CNN has the beacon of integrity, the law and order guy, the guy who would tell the truth no matter what the consequences. This is the guy who's issuing a hit on President Trump, the president that the American people.
By the way, when Comey was hired as FBI director, Mueller had been the FBI director, and FBI directors are only supposed to serve for a certain number of years. I don't remember the number. Let's say it's 4 years, whatever it is. Mueller, and the reason we have a limited term is because it's a very powerful position. They learn a lot of secrets that are not public. It's a position that can readily be abused. So we want to limit the term of these guys. And Mueller had his term of FBI extended again and again and again and again by Congress. Mueller was there forever. And frankly, the institution was tired of Mueller. The government had grown tired of Mueller, and Mueller was getting up there in age, so it was time for him to go. And the FBI was widely perceived as being something of a mess. Maybe it wasn't being managed as well by Mueller. And so they brought in this guy, Comey, and I had friends active special agents in the FBI at the time, that they're all retired now. But when Comey was coming in, they were ecstatic. Comey's reputation was as a completely clean Boy Scout of a prosecutor before this. And they thought he was going to come in and clean up the FBI. Oh my God, that's not what happened.
Voted for. So it's guys like Comey and others who call the president the modern day Nazi, people who are in great positions of influence, who are saying that President Trump poses an existential threat to our country. These are people who hate democracy and hate the American people because they cannot stand that the people overwhelmingly chose to elect Donald Trump and send him back to the White House. So they are seeking other means to get their way and to try to remove him from that position.
How serious is the administration taking this, and what are the next steps going to be?
We're taking this very seriously. As you mentioned, the Department of Homeland Security, and specifically Sean Curran, the current Secret Service director, a man who has been willing to lay down his life as the lead of President Trump's Secret Service detail for years.
So I'm not going to play the whole thing. It's 4 or 5 minutes long, but this is concurrent with the time that he first put forth those the Seashell image. And of course, it would be a day without sunshine not to hear from
This time over
President Trump. So let's grab a couple bites from him.
This time over a social media post with seashells that said 8647. Do you really think that he was endangering your life or threatening your life with that?
Well, if anybody knows anything about crime, they know 86. You know what 86? It's a mob term for kill 'em. You know. You ever see the movies? 86 'em. The mobster says to one of his wonderful associates, 86 'em. That means kill 'em. It's, I think of it as a mob term. I don't know, people think of it as something having to do with disappearing, but the mob uses that term to say when they want to kill somebody, they say 86, the son of a gun. I'm trying to keep the language nice and clear. They don't use that term, son of a gun. They use another term. But that's a mob term for kill him. Yeah.
But do you really think your life was in danger?
Probably. I don't know. You know, based on what I'm seeing out there, yeah. The people like Comey have created tremendous danger, I think, for politicians and others. Comey is a dirty cop. He's a very dirty cop. He cheated on the elections. He tried to help Hillary Clinton, as you know. He dismissed a lot of things that he should have proceeded with. I wasn't involved, but he should have proceeded with.
Remember that? Remember his announcement to the press about the Hillary Clinton email server in her bathroom that we know was co-opted by Iran and by China? Hillary was running all her emails through the secret server because she was corrupt. She's taken bribes and kickbacks as Secretary of State from all over the world. Can't have those on her government email system because that's subject to a Freedom of Information Act and investigation. So she sets up a secret email server in her bathroom that contains state secrets. If a Navy sailor did that, he'd be prosecuted and put in Leavenworth for one email like that. And Comey investigates Hillary Clinton, has to reveal the truth that this email thing is real and it had secrets on it and it was not secured and it was in her bathroom. And then suddenly at the end, he lays out all the evidence for why she must be federally prosecuted, why anybody would be federally prosecuted. Any of you who've had a security clearance, you know what would have happened to you in the same circumstances. And then at the end, he wraps up by saying, but I don't think any reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. Look, what? Oh my God. The whole thing was rigged. Comey, a dirty cop indeed. A dirty cop indeed. How are we doing for the poll here? Wow, 2/3 of you. 2/3 of you think he's going to trial, but 1/3 of you think he won't. 1/3 of you think this is going to be dismissed before trial. I don't think that's going to happen, just not because some people wouldn't want it to be dismissed, but simply because that's not how it works in federal court, especially not in the Fourth Circuit. You know what does work? My buddies over at Chapter Medicare Advisors. If you are on Medicare, or you see it coming, I can see it coming. It's not that many years away for me. If you're on Medicare, you can see it coming, or you have a loved one who's on Medicare, can see it coming. You want to make the best informed, most confident, optimal decision for your healthcare, both in terms of how well it's aligned with your healthcare needs and what it's costing you. You know, Medicare is not really free. You got to pay for stuff. And there are over 24,000 Medicare plans available. But when you go talk to one of these brokers who signs you up for Medicare, they don't show you 24,000. They show you the 3 or 4 or 5 that are the highest commission for them. Do you know they have no fiduciary duty to offer you the best plan for you at the best cost? They're allowed to offer you plans that are not well aligned with what you need at too high a cost for you. They're allowed to prioritize on top of your interests, their own interest, the biggest commission. And of course, the bigger the commission they're getting, the higher the cost the plan has to be to cover that commission. Chapter Medicare Advisors doesn't work that way. They actually go through all 24,000 plans, Medicare offerings, and share with you the ones that are best aligned for your healthcare needs and at the lowest price. Historically, they save their members thousands of dollars on Medicare cost. In fact, just yesterday, we had a member of the community in the chat, just pop in and share this. Call Chapter. He said yesterday, I save $1,200 a year. That's common when people call Chapter Medicare Advisors. And whether it's you on Medicare or looking at it, you have a loved one, don't you want them to have the best plan possible at the best cost possible? And the best part of all, it doesn't cost you a penny. Chapter doesn't cost you a penny. They don't charge you anything. Not only when you first call them, but when plans need to be renewed, when new plans become available, they stay with you as your advisor for Medicare. And all you have to do is make a call. You'd be crazy not to call them. 617-644-0093, 617-644-0093. Don't you want better health care at lower cost? Saving thousands? Wouldn't that be great? It's like finding a bag full of money in the street, just there for the taking. And all you have to do is give my friends at Chapter a call, 617-644-0093. I can tell you when it's time for me to sign up for Medicare, I'm getting the advice of Chapter Medicare advisors so I can make the best informed, most confident, most optimal, most cost-effective Medicare decision for me. And you should too. You should too. All right, another clip here from, our great and powerful President Donald J. Trump.
He knew exactly what that meant. A child knows what that meant. If you're the FBI director and you don't know what that meant assassination. And it says it loud and clear. Now, he wasn't very competent, but he was competent enough to know what that meant. And he did it for a reason, and he was hit so hard. Because people like me, and they like what's happening with our country. Our country has become respected again, and all this. And he's calling for the assassination of the president.
Obviously, he apologized and said he doesn't.
Well, he
wasn't
apologized because he was
violence. But
look, he's a very bad.
What do you want to see happen? What do you want to see happen?
I don't want to take a position on it because that's going to be up to Pam and all of the great people. But I will say this: I think it's a terrible thing, and when you add his history to that. If he had a clean history, he doesn't. He's a dirty cop. He's a dirty cop. And if he had a clean history, I could understand if there was a leniency. But I'm going to let them make that decision.
And they've made that decision, of course. Now, at the time, as I said, Comey was on a book tour. So he's going on all the talk shows. And he's laughing about this 8647, and he does not appear to be suggesting that he doesn't know what it means. Here he is on the Stephen Colbert Show.
Here, but is this Instagram?
Instagram.
You grammed this. You were
It's
walking
so
on
funny.
the beach.
Look how
what
smiley
happened?
he
You walking
is.
on the beach, and you saw this on the beach.
Yeah, my wife and I, Patrice, were walking on the beach and saw those numbers in shells on the beach. And
You didn't do this. Somebody else did this.
Yeah, somebody else did it. We were on a walk preparing for this week, the rollout of my book.
Yep.
She looked at it and said, "Why'd someone put their address in the sand?"
All right.
And then we stood at it, trying to figure out what it was. And she'd long been a server in restaurants. And she said, "You know what I think it is?
Yeah.
I think it's a reference to restaurants when you would 86 something in a restaurant."
Right, it's off the menu.
Yeah. I said, "No, I remember when I was a kid, you'd say 86 to get out of a place. This place stinks, let's 86 it."
Right. I was a bartender. You would 86 a customer if they were getting drunk. Like, let's 86 them. Let's, like, give them a low-proof alcohol, something like that. Yeah.
And so I said, I think it's a clever political message. And she said, "You should take a picture of it." I said, "Sure." And then she said, "You should Instagram that." And boom.
Well...
Another clip. Oh, this is, I love this woman. This is the woman who, whenever she's dealing with Trump, her face is completely frozen. She's like a wax figure, no expression at all. But she likes James Comey. Look, she's, find you a woman like Nicole Wallace. Find you a woman who looks at you like Nicole Wallace looks at James Comey.
You look at this White House now, and it's hard to imagine two FBI agents ending up in the sit room. How did that happen?
I sent them.
Here he's talking about how he set up Michael Flynn and General Flynn. He sent these FBI agents to Flynn to pretend they were having just a pleasant conversation, just to collect some background information, and it was a perjury trap for Flynn. That's the kind of guy James Comey is. Here's another Comey clip. Comey was absolutely delighted by the idea that Trump was being humiliated and might go to prison when Trump was being prosecuted. Here he is with Jen Psaki. Jen Psaki.
So a lot of people have suggested that there are a range of factors that would make it difficult to put the system has not been tested in this way. Do you agree with that it would be difficult or nearly impossible for the law enforcement institutions to put him in actual jail?
No. They would just put him in a double wide somewhere out near the fence, out in the grass. And he would eat there, he'd shower there, he'd exercise there, he'd be away, as Danya Perry said, from general population. But it's obvious.
So it's easy to put Trump, a president, in prison. How hard do you think it'll be to put Comey in prison? The whole thing, of course, is laughable. Comey says he just happened to stumble across the random political message smack dab in the middle of promoting his book. His book, by the way, you know what his book was about? The premise is that people were posting messages to induce stochastic terrorism and assassinations. Exactly the kind of messages that he just found in the sand. FDR Drive. What he found in the sand was exactly what his book was about. Just happens to tie in with the promotion of his book schedule. Insurrection Barbie here. Great take. James Comey did not stumble onto a beach and innocently photograph some seashells. He's the former director of the FBI. He spent decades studying exactly how coded language is used to signal violence against public figures. He led the Bureau through the rise of stochastic terrorism as a national security category. And of course, stochastic terrorism is a form of terrorism where you don't directly order someone to harm someone else. You just put out messages that Trump is a Nazi, punch a Nazi, these people are bad, and you put out enough of those messages into your tribe of left-wing lunatics, and you know some of them are going to commit acts of violence. You don't know exactly who will commit what act of violence against whom, but you know statistically it's going to happen. That's stochastic terrorism. He led the Bureau through the rise of stochastic terrorism as a national security category. Then he posted 8647 arranged in sand to hundreds of thousands of followers, with 86 being slang for elimination and 47 being the sitting president of the United States, who had survived 2 assassination attempts in the previous 12 months. He took the post down within hours, which is the move of a man who knew exactly what he had communicated and realized he had said it too plainly. Innocent posts do not get deleted within hours. The defense that he simply did not connect the numbers to violence is laughable. He was on a national press tour promoting his novel FDR Drive, a thriller about a public figure using coded messaging to incite his followers to commit acts of violence against political enemies. He told NPR the book's central theme was free speech and what happens when someone's words incite violence. A man cannot be on national radio explaining how coded incitement operates while simultaneously claiming he failed to recognize coded incitement in his own Instagram feed. This is not a coincidence. That is a confession delivered by a defendant who spent 8 years building a public career on personal opposition to Donald Trump. The First Amendment is not a magic word. The Supreme Court ruled in Counterman v. Colorado in 2023 that true threats lose protection when the speaker consciously disregards a substantial risk his communication will be read as threatening violence. By the way, consciously disregard, that phrasing, that's a legal phrase of art. That's recklessness. Recklessness is the creation of an unjustified risk of harm to another, and then you indulge in the risk anyway. The classic example would be drunk driving. When you're at the bar, you get drunk, you get into your car to drive home. You have no intent to harm anybody. You just want to drive home. But you know when you get behind the wheel and you're driving that you're creating an unjustified risk of harm to others. If you end up harming someone, you end up running someone over and killing them, it's not murder because you didn't have an intent to kill, but it is manslaughter. It is involuntary manslaughter, reckless killing. Well, the same concept of recklessness applies here. So all the people saying you have to prove intent, you just have to prove recklessness. And in any case, if you had to prove intent, it's not that hard to do, depending on the evidence you have at hand. But all that's required is recklessness, reckless disregard. The Supreme Court ruled in Counterman v. Colorado in 2023 that true threats lose protection when the speaker consciously disregards a substantial risk his communication will be read as a threatening violence. Comey's expertise, his audience, his timing, his takedown, and his 8 years of documented hostility toward the president all answer that question. He knew He, of all people, knew. And in the end, the country needs to face what this case actually is. A former director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation posting a coded call for the removal of a sitting president during an active assassination threat environment, then asking the same bureau he once led to believe he meant nothing by it. It is, of course, nonsense. All right, so first of all, if you're interested in this topic, I urge you to follow my buddy Bill Shipley, Shipwrecked Crew, on X and on Substack. I've covered his content before. He's just a great lawyer, former career prosecutor, defended 90 plus of the January 6th protesters as a defense attorney for them. Extremely knowledgeable in how federal prosecutions work. He's been the truth teller out here, shining the light of truth on all the the left-wing nut jobs who pretend to know how the legal system works. So I'm going to share a lot of his content here. Everything Bill says is consistent with my experience in the law. 35 years practicing law as a criminal defense attorney. And the stuff that the left-wing Comey defenders are saying is just utter nonsense. Before I do that, let me hit a few of these super chats. Mike Taylor, $5. Thank you, my friend. Do you think it will stick to Comey like glue? I mean, here's the thing. None of us know what the evidence is, do we? The grand jury saw the evidence. We haven't seen the evidence. The indictment doesn't set out the evidence. At least it doesn't have to. James Marino, $10, says, Dems always scream circumstantial evidence. My wife enters our house with a gun. A gunshot's heard. She walks out with the gun. Circumstantial evidence. P.S. Nobody would convict her. By the way, there's plenty of convictions that happen with circumstantial evidence. Often, circumstantial evidence is the best evidence. It's always portrayed in movie and TV, court, and police dramas like, well, all we've got is circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence just means it's not direct evidence. It's not like eyewitness testimony. But eyewitness testimony is not great evidence. Some of the worst evidence is eyewitness testimony. You all know if you take 5 eyewitnesses and you separate them, you don't get the same story from each of them. If you did, you'd figure it was rigged. You get a variation of the story from each of them. Watch the movie My Cousin Vinny. Remember the old lady with the big fat glasses and the guy cooking grits? How they were impeached on cross-examination by Vinny? Eyewitness testimony is often the worst testimony. Circumstantial evidence is often the most compelling, powerful testimony that there is. There's nothing wrong with circumstantial evidence. James Marino, forgot to say, I'm dead. We got it. Thanks for being a member, man. Ozzy Crosby, $5. He will never be convicted for this. It would make more sense to go after Letitia James. So much evidence, infuriating. I don't know. People have been convicted for this crime routinely. People are convicted of threatening the president multiple times a year. I don't see how you can say he won't be convicted when you haven't seen the evidence. Most of the people saying he can't be convicted, almost none of them. No one's seen the evidence that was shown to the grand jury. I haven't seen the evidence. I know that it's possible to have evidence that could convict him. Lots of people are. All right, let's take a look at this. Like this guy, for example. He's so confident in his take. Andrew Steele, whoever that is, says there's little or no basis for believing there is more evidence that would provide substance to the indictment other than the seashells, the seashell image. I would invite you to engage in the thought exercise of laying out what exactly that evidence could possibly be based on your prosecutorial experience. And I think he's talking to Shipwrecked Crew. But here's the thing. To say there's little or no basis for believing there's more evidence, there is in fact a basis for believing there's more evidence. The basis is the indictment. The grand jury returned an indictment. You think they did that just on the seashell picture? Why was there 9 or 10 or 11 months of investigation? They had the seashell picture from day one. Why would they need months of investigation to bring an indictment? Unless they were collecting more evidence. There's damn good reason to believe there's more evidence. People say, well, I don't see it in the indictment. And as Shipwreck Crew points out here, Indictments do not reflect the evidence. That's not what an indictment is for. So you could put evidence into the indictment, but you're not required. The purpose of an indictment is you show evidence to a grand jury. You say, if you believe this evidence supports probable cause that these crimes, these charges have been committed, you return a true bill. You return an indictment on those charges. And if you don't believe we've shown probable cause, you don't return a true bill. You don't return an indictment. And then all the indictment must contain, the purpose of the indictment, to be clear, is to put the charged person on notice of what the criminal charges are that he's faced with. That's all an indictment is required to do. You're being charged with this crime and you're being charged with that crime. It's not an evidentiary document. It's simply a document that puts a person on notice that you are being brought to trial on these criminal charges, these specific criminal charges. Be prepared to defend yourself. Now, there is such a thing as, it's called a speaking indictment. So you can add as much evidence into an indictment as you want. I would suggest it's not really appropriate to do that. It's usually done when the indictment is being used for a political hit job on someone, because they don't have an opportunity to contest the evidence, and the evidence is being put out in the world for people to see. So it's by the nature of a grand jury process, it's a one-sided presentation of the evidence. Remember that the defense doesn't get to present evidence to a grand jury. Only the prosecution presents evidence to a grand jury. The grand jury only hears one side of the story because they're not trying to determine legal defenses or justifications or legal excuses, or they're just trying to determine, is there probable cause to believe these elements of these charges have been met? That's it. And then the defenses and all that is done at trial. So the purpose of the indictment is to put the person on notice. These are the charges against you. And it's just a step in the process of getting someone to trial, getting them past that grand jury hurdle. Because if a grand jury says there's no probable cause, they can't take you to trial. But it's not to be an evidentiary document. Now, sometimes prosecutors will play what I consider a pretty scuzzy political game and put out their one-sided argument to the whole world to see, like months before the trial. And of course, then the media reports on it, it poisons the jury pool, because again, it's only one side of the argument. Properly, that side of the argument should be presented at trial, and then the defense can counter that, right? Cross-examine those witnesses, present their own case in chief. When an indictment includes a long diatribe of the prosecutor's evidence, they call that a speaking indictment. The indictment is doing more than what it must. It's speaking the prosecutor's case. I would suggest that's generally inappropriate. But in any case, an indictment's not required. It's not an evidentiary document. It's a charging document. Shipwrecked Crew, again, he writes, the Comey indictment says all it needs to say. Indictments are neither strong or weak. The indictment has no bearing on the outside of the case. When you get to outcome of the case, when you get to the merits of the case, that's where the evidence matters. And no one here knows what evidence the Department of Justice has, because it's not in the indictment and it's not otherwise publicly available. And people are saying, well, what about Comey's defenses? You know, he'll raise a First Amendment defense and all kinds of things. And as, again, Shipwreck Crew points out, a prosecutor does not include defenses in an indictment. That's not the purpose of an indictment. It's not like a mini trial. A grand jury is not a mini trial where you have both sides presented. You only have the state side presented. So the prosecutor doesn't take into consideration defenses. I mean, of course, in planning strategically for the trial, he'll consider what defenses the defense might raise, but that's not part of the grand jury or indictment process. The only question to be answered is the admissibility and persuasiveness of the government's evidence. Even if extrajudicial factors diminish the likelihood of conviction, they don't factor into whether or not to charge. You can still charge. And then we have some really laughable accounts. So this guy goes by Legal Nerd. I've encountered him before in other matters. He's extremely confident about his takes on the law. and he has an almost perfect record of being wrong. So he asks Bill, Shipwrecked Crew, if the only evidence is the picture, 8647, and then his deleting the post, Would you seek an indictment, Bill? Remember, Bill used to be a prosecutor. And Bill answers, no, I wouldn't. If that was the only evidence, I wouldn't. But that suggests they have more. What I think they have are communications to and from Comey about that Instagram post and his comments in response, maybe his emails, maybe emails between his agent and the publisher, laying out what he planned to do as a marketing stunt, knowing it would be controversial and might spur a nutcase to act. The standard under Counterman versus Colorado, again, is not intent, it's recklessness. Maybe they have witnesses who he spoke with in the immediate aftermath of the Instagram photo, and he provided candid commentary on his intentions. And that commentary could be recounted by those witnesses at trial. And I know what you're thinking. Out-of-court statements asserted for the truth of the statement are hearsay. They're not admissible. But one of the exceptions to the hearsay exclusion is statements against interest, like confessions. And they may have those. Bill says maybe those witnesses were put before the grand jury involuntarily. That would explain the 10-month delay. It takes time to compel people to testify before a grand jury if they don't want to. Here's another Comey defender. As Barb McQuaid, let's see what her purported credentials are. A wife, a mom, University of Michigan law professor, former U.S. attorney, Eastern District of Michigan, MS Now legal analyst, so a left-winger. She writes, as I told the BBC, Seashell indictments fall far short of the legal standard of a true threat. The only true threat here is to the rule of law. But again, that presumes that all the DOJ has is this picture. Why would we believe that? Why would we believe the grand jury would return an indictment based just on the picture? And Bill responds, he says, if only for you trials were based on reading the indictment to the jury and then just ask them to deliberate and vote guilty or not guilty. Unfortunately for you, indictments are meaningless at trial. Indictments are merely how you get the person into trial. Then the evidence comes in, and you don't know what the evidence is, and neither do I. Brandon Straka, this is a guy who was a lifelong liberal. The liberals turned on him, and suddenly he pretends he's a conservative. He's not a conservative. He writes, you'd have to prove that Comey meant the worst version, the worst interpretation of 8647, and I don't understand how anybody thinks they can do that. Again, he thinks you have to prove intent. You only have to prove recklessness. Straka writes, if Comey wrote the words, Trump needs to be removed, how does one prove he meant the worst meaning of that, like assassination instead of impeachment? It can't be done. You can't prove intent. If we can't definitively prove what someone's intention is, we shouldn't normalize prosecuting people for speech. That's crazy. Again, we prove intent thousands of times a day in courtrooms all over America by making inferences from evidence. My buddy Viva Frey, David, says, here's how you prove intent, which again isn't required, only recklessness is required, with the words that he used in his next post. He's the former director of the FBI. He knows exactly what 86 means, especially in the aftermath of the Gretchen Whitmer scandal. And he literally told us what he was doing in the post that immediately followed 8647, singling out his enemies by name and telling his fans that something should be done about them, like Henry VIII saying, will no one rid me of this turbulent priest? And then, of course, the priest was assassinated. And some of his fans obliged, killing or grievously injuring his foes. Innocent until proven guilty, but I think sufficient elements exist to charge him. Well, the grand jury believed the elements of those crimes had been proven to a degree of probable cause. And Shipwreck responds to Brandon Straka and says, you need to quit playing lawyer simply because you were once a defendant. Intent can be inferred from conduct. Of course it can. Standard federal jury instructions tell the jurors that intent is rarely established by direct evidence, like a confession. It's often found from circumstantial evidence, from conclusions drawn from a defendant's conduct. That is the subject of direct evidence, like witness testimony, documents, or video. We make inferences from other evidence. Again, this legal nerd character. The indisputable fact that the indictment doesn't contain any reference to a required element, true threat, consciously disregard, substantial risk, is substantial evidence that the inexperienced assistant U.S. attorney didn't properly instruct a grand jury. This is, first of all, this is nonsense. All this language he's talking about here is language from that Coleman v. Colorado case, Supreme Court case. It's not in the statute. These are not elements of the statutory charge. And these are arguments that would be made in court as a legal defense. And Shipwrecked Crew responds to that by just quoting the statute, the criminal statutes to which the grand jury returned an indictment. It says, I don't see any reference to true threat or conscious disregard in that statutory language. Those are not elements of the crime. The elements that Congress defined when they created the statute. An indictment that tracks the language, a charge that tracks the language of the indictment, I would say an indictment that tracks the language of the charge is sufficient to bring someone to trial. The fact that the word interpreting a statute, the cases interpreting a statute, are not set forth in the indictment does not lead to the conclusion the grand jury was not properly instructed. Trump University law grad, just a made-up account, of course. If there are multiple reasonable interpretations of what 86 means, it is not an objective threat. No, we can make inference about what Comey meant it to be. As this guy notes, before the legal pundits claim the indictments against Comey is flawed, keep in mind a few things. A grand jury thought the indictment was appropriate. Professional prosecutors think the indictment is appropriate. Department of Justice, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, think the indictment is appropriate. Comey made many inconsistent statements about what he thought the shells meant. Non-public evidence that we haven't seen, that nobody has seen, including everyone opining on this, except the grand jury has seen it. Non-public evidence exists to prove that Comey knew what 8647 meant, or we would not have had the indictment. Proved to at least a degree of probable cause. There's no doubt that subpoenas went to Comey's cell phone, and email providers. Within those records could be admissions that he knew what it meant, but perhaps was just joking. That sort of reckless disregard of the public perception of the threat is exactly the evidence that takes this beyond a reasonable doubt. Also, Comey spent a lot of time publicly pontificating about what 86 means. He called the shell formation clever and cool, wondered with his wife what it meant. Menus? Leaving a restaurant? Few North Carolina jurors will consider this even plausible. You know what else? Comey never questioned what 47 meant. It could be reckless that Comey knew 47 meant Trump and knew 86 meant at least getting rid of him in some fashion. It would be laughable that the former FBI director didn't stop and wonder if it would be reckless to applaud getting rid of the president in some fashion as clever or cool. In other words, the other side, Comey's defenders, want you to believe that unless you can prove he meant 86 to be assassination, he can't be guilty of these crimes. But all that's required is reckless. If he only knew that 86, one interpretation among many, was assassination, was it not reckless to post this? That some people would apply that interpretation, assassination, to that image? Assassination of the president? That's reckless disregard. Conscious disregard of an objective threat to the president is a crime. Neither statute with which he's charged requires any intent to carry out the threat. So yeah, I think Comey has a lot of genuine legal vulnerability here. Same account, J-Town, says the Google Law School alumni base learned for the first time yesterday after a Google search about the concept of a true threat, which could be a defense at trial. I wasn't making a true threat. But indictments, which is where we are, do not address defenses or constitutional issues like it's First Amendment speech. True threat is conceptually a First Amendment issue addressable through arguments to the court post-indictment. This absurd, the indictment is thin or insufficient mantra by liberal lawyers will be handled in a hearing where I expect the reveal of very damning evidence against Comey, texts, emails, whatever the grand jury was satisfied by to return the indictment, where Comey knew exactly what 8647 meant. That's willfulness. That gets past the reckless analysis of true threat by Counterman versus Colorado. Shipwreck crew again. The statute under which Comey is charged is not itself contrary to the First Amendment. Therefore, the indictment is not subject to a facial challenge as unconstitutional. There have been plenty of successful prosecutions on this statute. So one of the things Bill's getting at here is some people have been arguing that the charges should be dismissed by the trial court as applied to Comey. So you can challenge a statute as a facial challenge, meaning there's no circumstances under which it could be appropriately applied to anybody. It's just unconstitutional. Or you can attack it as applied. It's generally lawful, but it's wrong to apply it to this particular person under these circumstances. There is no facial challenge to these criminal charges, generally, the criminal statutes, because they're applied to people all the time, and people are convicted all the time. So demonstrably, there are circumstances in which they can be appropriately applied. There is no facial challenge. There could, in theory, be an as-applied challenge. For example, Comey could say, they can generally be applied, but it can't be applied to me under these circumstances because this is a vindictive prosecution, which is challengeable, a vindictive prosecution. But here's the thing with an as-applied challenge. As-applied challenges don't apply. They're a defense, in effect, that's made at trial, an affirmative defense, as Bill says here. It's not the thing that gets you a pre-trial dismissal of an indicted charge. Now, a prosecutor could take that into consideration, that there's an as-applied problem here that will be raised at trial, and therefore I don't want to move forward with the case, but they don't have to. All they need is the indictment to move forward. No Rumble rants today. It's kind of grim. James Marino, $5. The forfeiture charge tells me there is more than just a post. Yeah, right. I agree. Warren Lee, $5. Thank you, man. Circumstantial. In 2020, there was already the Whitmer 8645 issue. His claim of ignorance, 8647, is unlikely, although ignorance isn't guilt. P.S. Bam! No one's going to believe that he didn't know what 86 meant. No one will believe that. Amazing disgrace. Now, if he were in front of a D.C. jury, maybe he would say that nonsense, and they would say, "Oh, we're going to pretend to believe him," but no one would really believe him. Amazing disgrace. Member for 9 months. Remember, they claimed a dog whistle taken deliberately out of context was enough to impeach a sitting president. Yeah. Hey, thanks for being a member for 9 months. As a member, of course, you get to join us not just for this show about Comey, but for our members-only show that follows immediately after this one. We transition right into it, and that is going to be a look at how the Democrats are melting down over yesterday's Voting Rights Act and how uncharacteristically aggressive the Republicans are talking about being in redistricting, now that they don't have to be bound by racist congressional districts. And a $3 super sticker. Thank you, my friend. No question or comment, just generosity. That's always appreciated. Okay, more of this. Jonathan Turley. So he has an interesting take here. Jonathan Turley is an interesting guy. So he's a very, very smart lawyer. Very, very smart guy. I have a lot of respect for Jonathan Turley. But I've noticed in the context of my own area of expertise, which is use of force law, self-defense law, that when Jonathan Turley wanders into fields of law in which he doesn't have genuine expertise, he gets in over his head pretty quickly. He goes from being like reliably 100% correct on the law very quickly to like 80% correct, 60% correct, 40% correct, because he writes these columns like every day. He doesn't have time to become an instant legal expert of the level that I would be in self-defense law or other people would be on this case. He takes a more generalist lawyer kind of approach, and that can get you into trouble when the details matter. Again, he's a legal commentator. I'm not an expert on every field of law either. But Jonathan Turley here writes, as one of Comey's longest and most vocal critics, I would frankly prefer to crawl into one of Comey's conversant shells than write this column. However, here we are. This indictment is unconstitutional and will not likely survive constitutional challenge. And it's shocking to me to see Jonathan Turley write this, because this is a completely ignorant statement. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean, he's literally ignorant. He's unknowing of what the evidence is. If you don't know what the evidence is, how can you possibly say that this is constitutionally protected free speech in the totality of the evidence you haven't seen? How can you possibly say the indictment is unconstitutional? The indictment might be unconstitutional. It depends on the evidence, but I don't know what it is, and Jonathan Turley doesn't know what it is. Ed Martin writes, Turley makes you think. Turley makes you think. But as Bill points out, this indictment will survive pretrial challenge because it's happening in the federal Fourth Circuit, and the Fourth Circuit does not allow pretrial as-applied challenges. Now, it might not survive a Rule 23 dismissal. That's another way to get a charge dismissed. But the Rule 23 dismissal only happens after the state has presented their case in chief at trial. So if the state the Department of Justice presents their whole case and then rests, and a judge looks at that and says no rational jury could convict on that evidence, the judge can dismiss the case on a Rule 23 motion. But that's not pretrial. That's the middle of the trial, after the government has had a chance to present the actual evidence. Andy McCarthy, another former prosecutor who Bill Shipley and Andy McCarthy are friendly, but Andy McCarthy, he writes for National Review Online or National Review, the print magazine, I forget which. Almost every legal take I've ever seen him have is wrong, especially when he covers like police use of force, shootings of suspects. He's always wrong. I mean, he's never uncertain. He has a high degree of confidence in his legal takes, but he's almost invariably wrong. And he wrote this column, National Review, leave the United States out of Trump's lawfare indictments. This indictment is just inherently corrupt. It's lawfare. It's not justice. And his friend, Bill, writes to him, but what if, Andy, after the government presents its evidence, and then the defense asks for a Rule 29 dismissal, and the judge denies it, and the jury is fully and properly instructed on all aspects of the criminal charges, consistent with Supreme Court decisions, the jurors then decide to convict James Comey. What do you say then? That there was no substance here? And of course, Andy can't respond with substance. He says, well, what if pigs fly? This case will be thrown out pre-trial. No rational juror could convict. How can you possibly say that when you haven't seen the evidence? You have no idea what the evidence is. As I point out to Andy McCarthy, he writes, the case will be thrown out. No rational jury convict. I said, only an idiot. Only an idiot can make that statement without having seen the government's evidence. And you, sir, Andy McCarthy, you've not seen the government's evidence. It's amazing to see a lawyer write like that. Shipwrecked Crew also responds. He goes, Andy, the Fourth Circuit has a strict rule. There is no pre-trial evaluations of the government's evidence by the judge, where the judge can decide it's not good enough. Even as applied challenges on a First Amendment basis are an appellate issue. Their earliest this is going to get tossed out is mid-trial by a Rule 29 decision by the judge after the government presents all its evidence to the trial jury. The First Amendment is not an immunity claim that you settle pre-trial. It's based on the evidence. And you don't get to test the evidence pre-trial. The jury, the finder of fact, tests the evidence. More on this. This accountant's pretty good take. Look at U.S. v. Berger, just decided by the Fifth Circuit, so the adjacent circuit. This is in the Fourth Circuit. Last month, the case there said the issue of whether a statement was a true threat is not decided pre-trial. It's decided by the jury, the finder of fact. Now, North Carolina is in the Fourth Circuit, where this is being tried. It's not in the Fifth Circuit, but the reasoning is valid. It's based on the evidence, and the juries are the finder of fact. They're the ones who evaluate evidence. Shipwreck crew agrees with that take. Exactly. In criminal cases, the question of whether a factual basis to prove the charge at trial is a question for the jury. The petite jury, not the grand jury, the trial jury. And there's no requirement that the government preview its case for the judge to make a fact judgment. The jury makes the fact judgment. This is out of respect for the grand jury's role. The grand jury looked at all the evidence and said, yeah, there's probable cause to bring this person to trial. The grand jury has already determined that a trial is necessary, and that's their role, not the trial judge's role. Legal errors can be the basis for a dismissal, but the factual claims of factual insufficiency are not the basis for a dismissal. The court can dismiss on a Rule 29 motion after the government has presented its evidence to the jury. After that, not before. Lots of things people are bringing up to try to get Comey out of this. People talking about Brady rights. Comey has a right to see all the evidence. He has a right to see all the evidence before he goes into trial, but not at any particular time before trial. Not now. It doesn't affect the indictment. He doesn't have a right to see all the evidence for the indictment. That's not how that works. And Bill just keeps making the same point over and over again. The lefty legal beagles decrying the merits of the indictment of Comey all realize one thing. The case is going to trial. No one yet has explained how it can be derailed pre-trial in federal court. That's why they're harping on these merits. There is no basis to dismiss this charge pre-trial. Just a few more here. Let's see, another super chat. Chet Falkenheiner, $5 says, appreciate your show and the wonderful commentary. Bravo, Zulu. Good sir. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. And people are raising things like a selective vindictive prosecution. They think it's just because Trump doesn't like Comey. The fact that Trump doesn't like Comey, if Todd Blanche didn't like Comey, that doesn't make this a vindictive or a selective prosecution. Those things are very technical terms of art. They're almost too complicated to go into in a general legal commentary show like this. But selective prosecution, you'd have to show that like there's tons of people who did exactly the same thing of Comey who've not been prosecuted. That's not the case. People are prosecuted under these statutes all the time. So it's not selective. Other than, of course, prosecutors have a general privilege to allocate their resources as they think best. But Comey's not some outlier. People are prosecuted on similar facts on these charges all the time. And vindictive prosecution is different than selective prosecution. Vindictive is requires a certain timing. So there's some conduct you engaged in that could have been criminally prosecuted. That occurs first. And then a prosecutor looks at that conduct and makes the decision, discretionary decision, not to prosecute those charges. And then after that, you do something that offends the prosecutor, and he retroactively goes back and changes his decision not to charge in the first place. That's a vindictive prosecution. It doesn't just mean the prosecutor doesn't like someone. You need that sequence of events. And people who say there's no evidence of Comey's intent, there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence of vindictiveness. And in any case, these are challenges that are made at trial. That's an as-applied challenge made at trial. Bill Shipley comments on that here. It says, as-applied challenges are not allowed pre-trial in the Fourth Circuit. How do you get vindictiveness or selective prosecution when others are prosecuted for the same crime? Personal animus towards the defendant is not an immunity from prosecution. I'm sure the LA County's DA's office hated Charles Manson. They were still allowed to prosecute him, even though they had personal animus. Personal animus. And there's no evidence of the timing required for vindictiveness. Okay, let's see. Last couple of slides here, I think. Yes. Before we transition over to the, just some context here. Remember, Bill Mitchell points out the E. Jean Carroll case against Trump, the so-called rape case, was built almost entirely on hearsay. Entirely on hearsay. In fact, I'm going to pull up the jury verdict form from that case. Wasn't hard to find. For the people who accused Trump of being a convicted rapist. The E. Jean Carroll case was built almost entirely on hearsay. Carroll's words and what her friends claimed she told them decades later, and of course was inconsistent with a lot of demonstrable facts. Clinton appointed Judge Kaplan, who grinned like he was eating a shit sandwich every time he got to deal with Trump and be in the media. Even let the 2005 Access Hollywood tape, you can grab him by the pussy, which is completely unrelated to E. Jean Carroll. She had nothing to do with that. He allowed that tape to be played for the jury. No physical evidence of a rape existed. There was no way to corroborate or refute witness testimony. Remember, New York State had to change its statute of limitations law just for Trump. And that's why we have statute of limitations laws, because evidence goes away. And how was someone supposed to defend themselves from some suddenly emerging charge, accusation for the first time decades after the claimed event happened? So on all crimes, except for murder, on all crimes, we say, listen, you're going to claim a crime was committed. You have a certain number of years to make your case. 3 years, 5 years, it varies. But after that point, we're not going to let you do it anymore because we don't have confidence the evidence is any good. New York State changed its statute of limitations laws on a rape charge just to go after Trump and then changed it back. No physical evidence of rape existed, no way to corroborate or refute witness testimony. This testimony would not even have been allowed in a criminal trial. This, of course, was a civil suit. The jury explicitly found no rape occurred. And this is their verdict form. Did Ms. Carroll prove by a preponderance of the evidence, which is the threshold for a civil trial? It would have had to have been beyond a reasonable doubt for a criminal prosecution. But by a preponderance of the evidence that Mr. Trump raped Ms. Carroll. No! The jury said no rape. Only after, when Kaplan wanted more media coverage, Judge Kaplan got in front of the cameras and said, well, it was the kind of thing that commonly would be referred to as rape. Can you imagine a judge saying that? What a clown show. Only in New York. But they're objecting to Comey's treatment. Unbelievable. And of course, as we've learned, remember Trump's 34 felony convictions? That was another railroaded case in New York where they took a bunch of things that were misdemeanor, at worst, misdemeanor business filing errors. And they said, well, there's a bunch of misdemeanors, so now we're going to call it a felony. And why do they bring all these cases in New York? Because they can get a sympathetic jury. All it takes is a biased or sympathetic jury to convict. We saw that in the Southern District of New York with this business filings case, the 34 felony convictions. We saw this in the E. Jean Carroll rape case. Is Comey going to gamble while being squeezed? Might he take a plea bargain? Well, a plea bargain has to be offered. Mehek Cook writes, the most damaging fact in James Comey's indictment isn't the 8647 post, it's the deletion. Prosecutors will argue innocent people don't scrub evidence within hours. Comey taught investigators to think exactly that way. His own playbook is being run against him. Comey was a prosecutor. He knows what consciousness of guilt evidence is, as Shipwreck Crew points out here. So in my own area of the law, use of force law, self-defense, defense of others, defense of property, consciousness of guilt usually arises when someone uses force and then decides that they don't like what the situation looks like. They think maybe they're vulnerable to prosecution. Maybe they stepped outside the legal boundaries. Maybe it doesn't look good for them. So they change things. So if you lie to the police, that would be classic consciousness of guilt evidence in a self-defense case. Or you tamper with evidence. You drag the body into the house after you shoot them before you call the police. Or you flee the scene for purposes other than safety. This is all traditional consciousness of guilt evidence. What it mean, because we all know that people tend to conduct themselves differently if they believe they're guilty of something and might be caught. Even puppies, right? The puppy gets in the garbage, you come home, you haven't seen the mess yet, but the puppy's there looking ashamed. So basically these things, lying to the police, tampering with evidence, flight from the scene for purposes other than safety, it's as if we're saying, not only does a prosecutor think this defendant's guilty of this crime, but the defendant thinks he's guilty of the crime, or he wouldn't have tampered with the evidence, for example. And that's for the jury to weigh, which again gets us back into the trial. And the judge will instruct the jury, hey, the prosecutors accused the defendant of tampering with evidence. If you think that's proven, you're allowed to infer that the defendant thinks the defendant is guilty. It's a really damaging charge. Let's see what else. Yeah, I think that's just about everything. We got any more super chats to cover? No Rumble rants today. Slow day. 157 people on Rumble, and not a single Rumble rant. That's kind of grim. 157 on Rumble. Triple digits on Rumble is pretty good for us. Hey, folks, if you have not yet subscribed to this show, why don't you go ahead and take care of that? Do that right now. We just broke 285,000 subscribers yesterday. Our goal for this channel is 1 million subscribers. We get a little bit closer every day thanks to your support. And maybe even more important than subscribing, hit the thumbs up button. Hit the thumbs up button on YouTube. That convinces the YouTube algorithm into sharing our content more broadly. That's how we really grow the community. Of course, every time I mention subscribing, the odometer, one of you dirty rats unsubscribes, and the odometer rolls back. Oh, somebody came back in. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So we've all been here. We're about to transition now over to our members only show. And again, the link for membership, it's only 16 cents a day, $5 a month to get double the Branca content. And we're about to shift over to talking more about the Voting Rights Act decision out of the Supreme Court yesterday. It's fantastic. The Democrats are melting down. They know they just took a round through the head from the Supreme Court, politically, metaphorically speaking, YouTube. And they're freaking out about it, which is fantastic. So click in the description, and you'll be auto redirected if you're on YouTube. But in the description are links for the members only show. And that way you'll be able to join us, join the rest of the family, the Branca Show family over there for that members only show. I'm going to go ahead and start the background music for that. And I'm launching that show on YouTube and on Locals. If you want to be a member on Locals instead of YouTube, that's fine. Same deal, 16 cents a day, $5 a month. And until I see you all over there, folks, I'm going to wish you all a safe and happy day. And I remain Attorney Andrew Branca for The Branca Show.